All right, deep divers. Ever find yourself watching, like, glued to a functional fitness competition, and you're just, like, blown away by the power, the athleticism, but also kind of scratching your head at the rules. Like, how do they even judge something that intense?
Trust me, I'm right there with you. And that's exactly why we are diving headfirst into the, get this, freshly released 2024 IF3 Rulebook. Think of it kind of like our decoder ring for the world of competitive functional fitness.
And guys, I got to tell you, this thing is way more interesting than the words rule book might suggest. Like, seriously, we're talking packed with these little-known facts, strategic nuances, stuff that even if you're just a casual fan, you're going to find fascinating.
For example, did you know that there is a whole system, like a whole process for officially recognizing world records?
It's not just about hitting a PR in your basement gym. And get this, athletes actually need, are you ready for this? Personal insurance to compete.
Wow.
I guess when you're pushing your body to the absolute limit, anything can happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up for a sec.
Right. So the IF3, or International Functional Fitness Federation, they're the ones calling the shots. They're making sure everyone's playing fair, the competition is staying fierce, and they lay out this whole framework in this rule book.
So for anyone out there who might be new to the whole functional fitness scene, imagine a sport that tests athletes on literally everything: strength, speed, endurance. You've got gymnastic skills in there. You name it, they're doing it. It's like the ultimate test of all-around fitness. And this rule book is like the rule book for the Olympics, but instead of bobsledding, we're talking burpees and barbells.
Exactly. And one of the things that makes it so interesting is that it's a truly global sport. I mean, we're talking athletes from all corners of the world, each with their own, training styles, cultural backgrounds.
Which is so cool. But I mean, that also means things could get a little complicated if everyone's playing by, like, different rules, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
And that's where the IF3 comes in. They've created this rule book. In English, sure, but there's built-in flexibility for, different countries and regions. Like, they allow for different systems of measurement, for instance.
Wait, really? So you could have a competition in, say, France, and they're using kilos instead of pounds.
As long as those standards are just as challenging or even tougher than the metric system that's outlined in the rule book, it's all good. It's a really clever way to, acknowledge those global differences while still keeping things, fair and competitive on a worldwide scale.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got athletes from all over pushing their bodies to the max. Things are bound to get a little, shall we say, intense sometimes.
Yeah.
What happens when someone breaks the rules?
Well, remember those personal insurance policies we mentioned? Yeah, those come in handy because this rulebook does not mess around when it comes to athlete conduct.
Oh.
We're not just talking about, your average technical fouls here, although those exist too. They're really looking out for the safety and well-being of everyone involved, especially when it comes to things like coaching, younger athletes.
So background checks for coaches, mandatory insurance. It sounds like they're really taking a safety-first approach, which I can definitely get behind. But what about when things go, like, beyond a false start or a dropped weight? What happens if an athlete, gets a little too competitive, let's say?
Well, that's where things get really interesting because there's a whole system of disciplinary actions. It can range from, disqualification from a specific event all the way up to expulsion from the sport entirely. And what's really fascinating is that the severity of the penalty, it isn't always about the action itself, but about the intent behind it and any potential harm caused.
So we're talking serious consequences here.
Yeah.
But the rule book isn't just about, like, laying down the law. It's also about making sure everything is as, fair as possible, even at, like, the highest levels of competition.
Right. Absolutely. And one of the ways they do that is through, like, a really comprehensive appeals process. So if an athlete feels like they've been wrongly penalized, they actually have the right to challenge that decision.
Which is so important because, let's face it, emotions run high, you're in the heat of the moment, and sometimes a judge might miss something, or a call could be misinterpreted, right?
Exactly. And having that appeals process in place, it really helps to ensure that everyone feels like they're, being treated fairly and that the final decisions are based on, a clear understanding of the rules and the situation.
Yeah, it's like they've got their own, like, mini legal system in place to make sure everything is running smoothly. Speaking of running smoothly, let's talk about how these competitions actually work, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around how they even begin to score something as dynamic and multifaceted as functional fitness.
Well, imagine trying to compare, apples and oranges and then throw in some handstand walks and Olympic weightlifting just for good measure.
Right.
It's a tough job, but the IF3 has developed a pretty ingenious scoring system to make it, as objective as possible.
Okay, so break it down for me. How do they take all of these different movements, these skills, and turn them into like a cohesive scoreboard?
So at the most basic level, each event within a competition is assigned a certain number of points. And athletes earn points based on their performance in that event.
So like the faster you finish a workout or the more weight you lift, the more points you get.
Exactly. Although some events might be scored in reverse,
Okay.
where a lower score is actually better, especially for, timed workouts.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when two athletes end up with like the exact same score? Do they just call it a tie?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting because the IF3 has a very specific tie-breaking procedure.
Okay.
And it's not as simple as just looking at who finished ahead in the previous event.
Ooh, this is where my like competitive side starts to get really intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay. So the first tiebreaker they look at is your highest individual event placing. So let's say you and I are tied on overall points, but you took first place in one of the events.
Okay.
While I only managed a second place finish, you win the tie.
Wow. So even if you're like consistently strong throughout the entire competition, one like standout performance could make all the difference.
Exactly. And it just highlights how, every single event, every single rep really matters in the grand scheme of things. And then if by some miracle you're still tied, after comparing all of your individual event placements, they start looking at things like, your finishing times in each event.
Wow.
And if all else fails, they might even resort to a coin toss.
No way. A coin toss at the like elite level of functional fitness.
That's kind of hilarious and terrifying all at the same time.
It just goes to show that even with the most, comprehensive rule book and scoring system, sometimes you just have to leave it up to fate.
I guess that's all part of the excitement.
Right.
But before we move on from scoring, we have to talk about the different divisions within functional fitness.
Right.
Because it's not just like a free-for-all.
Right. You've got your individual men's and women's divisions, of course, but then it branches out from there. You've got teams, you have pairs. In some regions, masters for older athletes, juniors for the up-and-coming stars. It's really designed to be accessible and competitive for athletes of all ages and experience levels.
And speaking of accessibility, I love how this sport embraces its global reach. But I'm curious, does the IF3 do anything special for the host nation of the World Championship?
Actually, yes, they do. The host nation gets a few extra athlete slots for the World Championships.
Wow. So not only do they get to compete on their home turf, but they also get to send a larger team. Talk a home field advantage.
It's a great way to honor the host country.
Yeah.
And it also adds, an extra layer of excitement and national pride to the competition.
I can only imagine the roar of the crowd when that home team takes the stage.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we've covered athlete conduct, we tackled scoring, we even touched on the global scale of these competitions.
It's amazing how much ground you can cover just by diving into the rule book.
Right, and we haven't even gotten to the really fun stuff yet, the actual rules of the game.
Right.
Because as fascinated as I am by the structure and the scoring system, I'm dying to know more about those wait, really moments that make functional fitness so unique. Those little quirks and unexpected rules that kind of make you go, huh, I never thought of that.
Oh, I've got a few of those up my sleeve.
Yeah.
For example, did you know that you only have 10 minutes to challenge a score?
Wait, seriously, 10 minutes, that's it?
Yep. The clock starts ticking the second those scores are posted. So if you think something's off, you better act fast.
Talk about pressure. I can just imagine the athletes and coaches frantically huddled around a monitor trying to decide whether it's worth risking a challenge.
And it's not like they have, unlimited challenges either. There's a fee involved, and it gets progressively more expensive each time you challenge a score.
Wait, so it's like a strategic gamble?
Mm-hmm.
You have to weigh the potential reward of overturning a score against the risk of wasting your challenges and then racking up a hefty bill.
Exactly. It adds a whole other layer of strategy to the sport because sometimes knowing when to, hold back and conserve your challenges can be just as important as knowing when to fight for every point.
That's wild. I love it. It's like poker meets burpees.
And here's another rule that might surprise you. You can't challenge a judge's opinion on whether a movement was performed correctly or not. You can only challenge, like, technical errors in how it was scored.
So, like, if a judge misses a rep or something.
Precisely. But if they say, your squat wasn't deep enough and you disagree, tough luck. You can't challenge that.
Wow. So it's really important for these athletes to, like, be on point with their technique and to make sure that they're meeting those movement standards flawlessly.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the, level of expertise of these judges.
Yeah.
They're not just, casual observers. These are highly trained professionals who know the ins and outs of, every single movement.
Which makes me even more curious about those movement standards. Because as much as I love watching those, like, crazy feats of athleticism, I have a feeling there's, like, a lot more nuance and technicality to it than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole separate document dedicated to outlining the movement standards for, like, every single exercise and competition.
Wow.
From the seemingly simple air squat to those, mind-blowing muscle ups.
And they're not messing around with those standards either.
Nope. Every single rep has to meet a specific set of criteria in order to count.
So it's not enough to just, like, muscle your way through a workout. You have to be precise. You have to be controlled. You have to make it look effortless, even when you're, like, on the verge of collapse.
Right. And those judges, they're like hawks. They don't miss a thing.
I can only imagine the intensity of being under that kind of, like, scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to admit, it's also pretty amazing to think that these athletes are performing at such a high level of, like, technical proficiency while also pushing their bodies to, like, the absolute limit.
It's a testament to, their dedication, their discipline, and their, unwavering pursuit of excellence.
Okay, so we've covered the rule book, like, from A to Z, from athlete conduct to, like, movement standards.
We really have.
But I feel like we've only, like, scratched the surface of what makes this sport so captivating.
And that's the beauty of functional fitness. There's always more to learn. There's always, something new to discover, and the rule book is just the beginning.
Speaking of discovering, what about all the different competition formats? Because I know it's not just, like, one standard event after another.
Oh, you are right about that. The IF3 has done an amazing job of creating, a variety of competition formats to keep things exciting for both the athletes and the fans.
All right, hit me with it. What kind of formats are we talking about?
Well, you've got your classic individual medley.
Okay.
Which is like, the bread and butter of functional fitness.
The OG, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Athletes tackle a series of events over multiple days, testing their endurance, their strength, body weight skills, like the whole shebang.
And of course, there's a team medley too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where groups of athletes work together to, like, conquer those same challenges.
You got it. Teams of 4, typically.
Okay.
2 men and 2 women. It's all about teamwork, communication, and, pushing each other to achieve a common goal.
Teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. But I've heard whispers of something called a hyper medley. What is that all about?
Ah, yes, the hyper medley. That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Imagine a medley, but condensed into, like, a 2-hour pressure cooker.
A 2-hour pressure cooker of fitness. Sign me up. I mean, not really. I'll stick to watching from the sidelines.
Fewer athletes compete at once, but it's a knockout-style tournament with preliminary rounds, quarterfinals, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
They cram in as many as 6 medley tests in that time frame. Scores reset after each round, and only the top performers advance.
Whoa. Talk about a high-stakes showdown.
Oh, yeah.
And do they have hyper medleys for teams, too?
You bet. Both for teams of 4 and pairs.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about strategy and, pushing your limits under pressure.
I can't even imagine trying to, like, strategize and make split-second decisions while I'm, like, gasping for air. My muscles are screaming.
Yeah.
And then there are speed events.
Mm-hmm.
Pure adrenaline.
Right.
Imagine, like, a bracket-style race where you're not just competing against the clock, but also against whoever's, like, in the lane next to you trying to finish the workout the fastest.
Exactly.
Okay. That sounds intense.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned something earlier about a specific format for world records. What was that all about?
Ah, yes. The world record benchmark.
Okay.
It's the only way to make a world record official in the IF3.
So you're telling me all those, like, incredible feats of athleticism I see, like, online, they might not even be official world records unless they were done in this, like, specific format.
That's right. Which just goes to show how much, thought And structure goes into creating, a fair level playing field at the international level.
It's like the difference between running a marathon on like a certified course versus just timing yourself on your treadmill at home.
Exactly. And for the world record benchmark, they take a single, well-known benchmark workout. Think like Fran or Grace for your CrossFit enthusiasts out there.
Right.
And athletes compete on a standardized field specifically designed for that test. Fastest time under those official conditions, boom.
You're in the history books.
That's amazing. So it's not just about being like the best in your gym or even your region. It's about like proving yourself on a global stage under standardized conditions.
And that's what makes breaking a world record in functional fitness so special.
It's a testament to the dedication and skill of these athletes.
Absolutely.
It's like the difference between like hitting a home run in your backyard
versus hitting one out of Yankee Stadium.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that level of standardization and rigor, that's what elevates functional fitness from just a group of challenging workouts to like a truly global sport.
Totally. And it makes you appreciate like how much goes on behind the scenes to make these competitions happen at such a high level.
From the rule book itself to the judges, the organizers, the sponsors, it's a massive undertaking.
It really is. And it speaks to, the growing popularity of functional fitness worldwide.
Speaking of worldwide, I'm curious what's on the horizon for this sport. Any major competitions coming up that we should be like keeping an eye on?
Actually, yes. The European and Asian Championships are right around the corner.
Oh, nice.
And get this, they're both using the hypermedley format this year.
Ooh, now that is going to be must-see fitness.
Absolutely. It'll be really interesting to see how the athletes adapt their, strategies and pacing for those, like, condensed, high-pressure events.
I'm on the edge of my seat just thinking about it. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've gone from casual observer to functional fitness fanatic in the span of 20 minutes?
That's amazing.
The rule book really is a fascinating read, even if you're not an athlete yourself.
It's true. And I think what surprised me the most is just how much strategy is involved. Like it's not just about being physically strong and fit.
Right.
You have to be smart too. You have to know the rules inside and out. And you have to be able to make those split-second decisions that could mean, the difference between winning and losing.
It's like playing chess.
Yes.
But at 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to learn more, we'll be sure to link the full 2024 IF3 Rulebook in the show notes.
It's a great resource for, athletes, coaches, fans alike.
And hey, you never know. Maybe one of our listeners will be inspired to take the leap and try functional fitness for themselves.
Now, wouldn't that be something?
Until next time, deep divers, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing those limits.
Both physically and mentally.
And remember, the only rep that doesn't count is the one you didn't try.